Hey, John. Can you come it's just us. That's what he just asked.
He's the boss.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Anyone have a problem with not doing the Pledge of Allegiance? No reason, no political reason. It's just us, and it just seems like necessary for now. What do you guys like it? You look like you like it. You're in favor. Okay, we'll just do it. I don't care. It's fine.
Okay. So,
All right. I'd like to call to order the Wednesday, March 11th, 2020 meeting of the Tenino Planning Commission. Let the record show that all commissioners are present. Okay, please join me in the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Let's take a look at the agenda.
I'll move to accept the agenda as presented.
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Moving on to the minutes from the February 12th meeting.
I will move to approve the minutes from the February 12th Planning Commission meeting as presented.
And I will second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
All right, moving on. No public comments. Mayor's report. John? Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to rejoin you. It's been a while since I was able to. Back on February 25th, Mr. Brewster from the TRPC came and talked to the council about 3 pots of money that the city could apply for grants for street improvements. Shouldn't be news to anybody here. That's Transportation Alternative Program grants for trails, Surface Transportation Program grants for sidewalks and streets, and what we all colloquially know as county chip seal funds for additional street projects. They're available. We just got to apply for them. I don't know the status right now. Mr. Brewster also presented the updated regional transportation plan, and that's available on the city website if you want to check that out. It's also available on the county website, but we've linked to it. Washington State Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation offers tax incentive to property owners if the city will pass an ordinance that addresses historic preservation. So that's a project that Mayor Fournier has directed me to take on. So we'll be coming out with an ordinance to do that. The decision that has to be made with that is, will it be a mandatory program or will it be a permissive program? And what that refers to is, are we going to give citizens the choice to participate or are we going to make them participate? So the council direction is we want to do it in a permissive manner, so that's how we're going to write it. The city is back on a fairly solid footing with Timberland Regional Library. There was some angst between the two organizations for a while, but we've managed to smooth that over. And Executive Director Haywood came out and addressed the council, and it was a really good presentation. The Timberland Regional Library has partnered with Pacific Mountain Workforce Development Council. And so now all of the Timberland Library branches are like little sub-elements of WorkSource. So very soon here at our Tenino branch, They're gonna increase the number of computer terminals available. They're gonna increase the bandwidth available for those computers. And they're gonna have staff trained to assist people who need work source resources and how to find them. And Pack Mountain itself is like a Uber work source council, and they have existing contracts for online provided resources, databases, form banks, all kinds of stuff that helps both job seekers and business owners. So that's pretty exciting. During the 2020 budget development cycle, council agreed with the mayor that we should probably take advantage of the ability to increase our sales tax by about 1%. And we're in the process of doing that. We have to draw up an ordinance, and it's got to be voted on by the public, but that will allow us a little bit of money for public safety and a little bit of extra money for streets. The caboose project is coming right along. A guy named Donald Bowman has stepped up and volunteered, and he's bringing a lot of energy and a lot of resources. He and his daughter are developing a website and all kinds of stuff. They're over there working every day. The city's buying one of those auto barns, you know, frame auto barn with aluminum panels on it. We're gonna put that over the caboose to protect it from the weather and give those guys a protected environment to work with. He's developed a punch list, if you will, of all the stuff that he thinks we should buy to restore the caboose properly, and he's starting to work that off, so that's pretty exciting. As far as the ag park goes, just today, let me back up. So as part of the extension of the sewer and water lines to the ag park, we had to get Department of Health approval for the engineer's design, make sure we got the separation between the sewer lines and the water lines. And I think I told you before, there's a couple of points in the path where they're gonna have to bore under Old 99, go down around the north end, and then bore back to get to the ag park because of the restrictions in the right-of-way. But they're gonna do it, and they'll do it under budget. We got Department of the Health approval, and so today we sent the invitations to bid to the commercial journals in both Portland and Seattle, and to our own local newspaper. So on the 18th of March, those will be published. They'll be published again on the 1st of April. Engineer Marshall has organized a pre-construction meeting for people that are interested. We'll take them out there and show them the stuff, and you know, hopefully we'll get going on that. If it all goes according to plan, we'll be moving dirt by about May 1st. And if Doug Bloom's efforts to get the water lines from Houston Street to Hidden Meadows are any indicator, that project will be done in about 3 weeks. Which means, you know, by the end of April, we'll have utilities to the property. Our quarry house renovation project, I don't remember, I told you guys that we found some pretty serious structural things with the support footings, right? They're not in contact with the foundations. So he's made an amendment to the scope of work. It got approved last night. He's gonna do an engineering study, figure out how we get the posts in contact with the ground, get the weight off the middle of the building and onto the posts. The bad news is we got word from Thurston County that they know they owe us a contract, but for a wide variety of reasons, they're moving very slowly on it. So we kind of had to put the brakes on the quarry house restoration project because our own bank account is getting kind of low. Kind of same deal with this, the renovation for this building. The challenge there is that when we submitted the request to the legislature, it was good enough to get approval for the project, but the folks at Commerce wanted us to do a better job at the individual budget lines. And so I worked with Mike Marshall, and we got that done today, although I did not get it to Commerce today, but I will tomorrow. So we're hopeful in about 2 weeks, we'll get that contract between Commerce and the city going. That turns on the money flow to get this building going, and Mike's ready to go to bid with this project right now. So we'll be about 2 weeks behind. Pending your questions, that's the extent of my report.
Questions? No?
Thanks.
Thanks, John.
See you guys. I'm not gonna hang around tonight.
Okay. Project status update. Don't know what that means.
I'll provide that. I just wanted to bring you up to speed on several conversations I've had with the development community. I'm probably getting about 5 or 6 calls a week on questions on property and feasibility and how to allow for development, mostly infill. Stuff I can talk about, the lot on Sussex and Frost continues to have interest for a dental clinic. We had a pre-submittal meeting last month for about an hour and a half, meeting with potential developer and architect and engineer about some of those details. So I don't know the speed at which that's gonna move forward. It's a small site, so they have to move things around to get it to lay out correctly, and so that'll be a little bit more expensive. But it seems like it's serious. That'll be pretty neat, I think, a new commercial structure in town, right at kind of a pretty high visibility spot. So I think that'll help.
Is that right across from the grocery store?
Yeah. South of 507. So that's one thing. John mentioned Doug Bloom's property, the Hidden Meadows site. We're working on construction bonds for that. When the property owner bonds for the on-site improvements, they can actually final the subdivision, the long plat, and when you final it, that means the county gives you parcel numbers and addresses. Once you have that, you can actually sell the buildings. And so what that allows the developer to do is kind of make their way down the development without having to cash flow the whole thing all at once. So it makes it a lot more economically feasible for them. I asked him kind of how hot those properties were, and he seemed to indicate they were moving pretty good. I don't know how many they've pre-sold, but he has pretty high level of confidence they're gonna fill up right away. I'd expect to see like the construction bonds in the next week or two, and we can sign those, and then final the plat thereafter. So that should help him move forward with getting those houses sold, and even potentially people moving in the meantime. So that's the Hidden Meadows. There's some potential interest in the short plat. There's a Johnson Park Avenue short plat that I finalized a couple weeks ago. I think the appeal period for that short plat ends on Friday, the 13th. Following that appeal, the property owner can start with some of the on-site improvements, and then when they've done those things, then we again final the short plat, and addresses can get assigned for those 4 lots. A few other things in town like that are in varying stages of, draft and pre-application form.
And what about the mobile home down in the RV?
Yeah, I had to talk with a potential buyer of the mobile home park at Scatter Creek and 507. Sometimes these feasibility questions come in they come in a lot, and so I don't necessarily tell you every single one. Some of them are less serious than others, and we don't wanna make it harder for people to do work just because they're asking questions of the city. But this guy is a King County, he's done a lot of work in King County apparently. I didn't follow up with him, but that's what he told me on the phone today, and there's potential for new homes on that site. I don't think, and I know that we're live, but don't quote me, but I don't think you can do new mobile home parks in the city. I couldn't find anywhere in the code. I looked for 45 minutes. You can do new manufactured homes. Mobile homes / single wides, those are a whole different beast, the way that they're regulated through HUD and labor and industries. So there really are no more mobile homes that you can bring into a city. They just, the state won't let you move them on the highway. Because the way those work is, you pick it up and you put it on the back of a flatbed and you move it somewhere. You can't do that anymore. Most of them, because they're built, most of them are pre-1976, and anyway. The way Tenino's code is written is the manufactured home has to have been built within the last 3 years. And the minimum dimensions on that home can't be less than 14 feet wide. 14 or 17? One of the two. So it's on that particular site, if you're familiar with it, there's maybe 4 single wides on there. There may have been up to 6 at one point. My suggestion to that potential interested party would be, let's look at some type of stick-built option or modular home option on that site, rather than try to figure out how to bring in other, manufactured homes that are maybe older than that. Which, in a roundabout sort of way, got us to a conversation about tiny homes. That's what he's been doing up in the King County area, and he asked about that. Your code doesn't speak to tiny homes too well, but I think that's a potential work item for us. I think what I was telling the man I was talking to on the phone today is, my view of the city of Tenino is that your organization, although the codes are relatively dated and happens all the time unless you have the full rewrite, it's kind of patchwork, right? There's bits and pieces of different things that have kind of been put in there over time. Because of the size of this community and kind of, I think, the ability to be flexible and responsive, I think codes can get changed pretty quick. Quicker than most places. Certainly quicker than a place like Olympia or King County or Tacoma or some of these other, obviously bigger jurisdictions. So if the proposal, if the potential buyer wanted to do a cottage style cluster development with tiny homes or some other arrangement, even though the zone currently doesn't allow for it, I think we could figure out a pathway to make that work, within the confines of the ordinances, and we'd have to write a new section of the zoning code. We draft a cluster home or a tiny home overlay, or however, there's a whole host of different ways to do it, but I think we wouldn't be talking a 12-month period of time frame. We'd be talking, quite a bit less than that, which is still probably within the window of viability for somebody who's looking at, buying a lot and going through the process. Because there would be subdivision or some type of cluster development. Do you know what I mean when I say cluster?
I think I do, but.
So for example, that lot is up against the floodplain and is probably, a good sum of that property is probably within a wetland buffer. And you can't put houses in a wetland buffer, or if you do, it just gets complicated. So what you would do is, you would say, instead of just laying out this site with 5,445 square foot lots all the way around this cul-de-sac, let's say, which makes the two or three of the lots on the wet side real challenging, you reorganize that and you keep the density maybe the same way it is, but you don't have to strictly follow the 5,445 square foot requirement. So some of the lots could be 3,000 square feet, and then you have a set aside open space, and that's what kind of balances out, because most of the time the way codes are set up is you give something and you get something, right? There's this balance, and that would be the balance in that case, is you're having greater environmental protection, greater set-asides or setbacks from the buffers in the wetland, and yet smaller lot size and maybe additional density.
Question, what is our code with ADUs, additional dwelling units?
Yeah, the accessory dwelling units is, I didn't look at that today, cause the accessory dwelling units have to be accessory to a primary unit, right? And so they're accessory, which means, secondary to
A house or, right,
and so in almost every case, you have to have an existing home, and then once you have an existing home, you can have an accessory unit to that. That doesn't mean that there are home plans out there that are ADU compliant that could also count as a tiny home or other type of cottage style home. I mean, Lacey's got really good examples right now of 680 square feet and 800 square feet, studio and one bedroom respectively, plans that qualify as either tiny homes or as ADUs depending on what you want to do. And they would certainly work in a cottage style development where you're kind of clustering some homes in a section. And then as I told the gentleman today, when you build at densities like that and you shrink sizes and you make them more affordable, usually the community, again, on the balance side, wants to see greater allowances towards design guidelines and on-site amenities. So when you pack all these houses in, now nobody has a yard or nobody's got a garage, and so you have to still give them some sense of those types of amenities, because in this case, it's a single-family zone still. So you're supposed to still have kind of some single-family amenities and not just stack them all in there and make them, pave the rest of the lot and turn it into a parking lot and walk. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
I don't know what the ADU language is in Tenino's code. I can tell you what it is in Cooley Dam. I looked at that today for a long time. They don't have it. Well, theirs is bad, so.
That whole topic though would be really interesting to explore, especially, we're looking to try to increase density, right, with infill and everything. The ADU idea is a way that you can, people can increase the density on their property. They can create a secondary income that helps. I guess my only, I just think it'd be really neat to discuss. Just different,
Yeah, sounds good.
So it always helps when on something like this, there's someone on the other side pushing, or gently prodding, I should say, better than a push, to move out, because then it's not just the Planning Commission thinking up a bright idea and, hey, wouldn't this be great to regulate something in this way, right? Right?
I had a question, and I was gonna ask you if it makes sense to start and kind of preempt that, but you're saying no.
I think you can do it either way. I think you can do a lot of upfront work, and then you could wait, because what happens as we've talked about with the training sessions, when you apply it to one thing, you apply it to everywhere, right? And so it's sometimes, at least it's easier for me, and I think most people, if they have an example in front of them and say, okay, John Q, feasibility guy, wants to do this thing on this piece of land. Do we have something in our code that allows for that? And if not, what could we do that might work here? And then you have that example to play with, if you, in quotes, play with, and then you can apply that to other places in the city to see how that works. But I think there's value into doing things ahead of time too, if you know that there's demand. And so, Alex, if you think that there's other examples out there, backyard examples or, smaller lot examples that that would justify ADUs, I think that's right. There's, City of Lacey, again, if you wanna look at their website, what they did, and I was just really impressed with it, is they hired an architect to design, two sizes of accessory dwelling units, like I said, a studio version with 680 square feet and a one-bedroom version with 800 square feet. And these are full these are kitchens, bathroom, some type of shower, bath combo, obviously a room for, you know, a bedroom and bed and stuff like that. And none of them have garages, but they, you know, and Lacey hired an architect, they designed that, they plan checked it through their building department, and they pre-approved all 6 designs. Cause there's a couple different versions you can have of the 680 and the 800. And those end up, I think there's 3 or 4 versions per, so there's maybe 8 plans that they pre-approved, and there's different paint schemes and exterior design treatments and rotations, like I don't know if they reverse or mirror the floor plan or what it is they do, because everybody's site's gonna be a little bit different, and so having your door on the right isn't always gonna work, right? And they plan checked them and pre-approved them, so you can walk into City Hall and apply for an ADU in your backyard and almost get your permit over the counter. And they've also are working with banks to pre-approve financing to build.
Wow.
Now,
Getting a good response from
yeah,
people.
yeah, they are. I don't know if it's actually been done yet. So that's what I meant, Corey, about like doing things ahead of time. There's cities all over the state that you know went to put transfer development right programs together, TDR plans, and if you remember what those are when someone, you know, they buy credits from a bank somewhere because they wanna overuse their property, but they're gonna set, you know, it's just like sharing thing. Hardly anybody uses TDRs, so everybody went through all this effort to create this thing that maybe like 4 people in the whole state have ever used, right?
Yeah.
And ADUs, that's what Lacey found, is they found that they had ADUs on the books, and they allowed accessory dwelling units in almost all their zones, and they had like 3 permits over the last 8 years. And so they said, we've gotta do something to help people expedite and provide for these, and so we're going to front the design costs, and we're going to, you know, pre-permit, you know, pre-approve the plans and engineer plans and all this stuff. And with the hope that would help. And I just don't know how, it's pretty new, I mean, within 2 months. So I don't know how deep they are into that process. There's a lot of buzz about it, and I think it's a best practice that'll get picked up pretty quick.
How often do cities share with other cities things that they're doing? Are they pretty
All the
open to
time.
that?
Yeah, I mean, they kinda have to be, but I think you're seeing in like this Lacey example there, that's a competitive advantage for now,
Sure.
right?
How much do you think that a homeowner would save going through that process and selecting one of those plans as opposed to, you know, doing it themselves, I guess?
Oh, I don't know, I think, well, you can answer that, but I'll answer a different part first, which is, those are still like $160,000 homes
I see.
to build. I mean, it's not, you think it's like, oh, great, you know, I can build one of these and
Well,
put my
we
teenage
can
kid in there, right? No, I
Right.
mean, it's still.
It's not a garden shed.
Yeah, and I mean, so that 681, I think it's still, you know, 180 a square foot or something like that, so
Right.
$160,000, I mean, most people don't have that kind of cash sitting around, so I think that's what has happened, is when people run the numbers, they're like, I can't really rent that for $2,500 a month, right? It's a 1-bedroom or it's a studio, I don't really see how it pencils. So I don't know what their type of upfront costs they are offsetting by having had the city do the work.
Yeah.
Do you have an idea on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think just on the plans alone, you're probably looking at, you know, 15 to 2, if you're talking about design and everything. But I think one of the big perks though is the speed, right? Like I mean, there's such a hiccup sometimes with, you know, getting an application, submitting the application, you know, but to have it all just like ready to go would be a really major benefit. I didn't know they were doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think.
Plus the certainty, there's that too.
Yeah, that you're not, you know, spending money to draw something up and have them go, oh, there's no way. And then the other nice thing to it too is, you know, just, worst thing in the world is when you always see that building and you're like, oh, that building was done before they decided, you know, right? So if this is looking like the future, being able to create something that's going to, I mean, again, especially like, make it affordable, right? Make it simple, then also create something that, you know, your homeowner could have a second stream of income. Yeah. I also really think the tiny house thing was a really, really cool idea, but I think you have to be a very specific type of individual to live in 180 square feet. Whereas, you know, one thing we've been.
Especially with somebody else.
Yeah, right? And we've been doing a lot of work lately with kind of the not so big house concept where, you know, taking small spaces, but really high-end design and materials. I think, yeah, so I'm really interested in what's going on over there.
Alright, so if I may, everybody pull out your phones, I know you have one. All you gotta do is Google Lacey ADU. And you wanna click on the City of Lacey's link that says Accessory Dwelling Unit Program, City of Lacey. That should pop up a PDF, which gives you the how and the why and the pre-approved thing. There also may be, so hoping to get the picture, sorry. That was the real. I use Google, so, and you should too. If you click on images instead of Lacey, like it should show you the images of some of the backyard cottages. So mine, that very, very the first link on mine is like a 3x4 grid of the homes. It kind of looks like that.
Yep, I got the same thing.
So those are all, actually, it's 3x4, so that's 12. All of those are pre-approved. A couple of them have I think little lofts in them. You can kind of tell by looking at the pitch on the roof. You can see some of them have pitched roofs, some of them have flat roofs, some of them are like 312 pitch, some of them are 512 pitch. They're trying to fit with that whatever house that they are accessorizing, if you will.
Sure.
Different paint schemes. I think the paint is obviously up to the owner. They don't come pre-painted, so someone's gonna still have to stick build this, but all the sheets are in the building packet. They're all ready to go. So it's not that hard to try to, and I know the architects for that, and I think, you know, they're ready and willing to duplicate that program for other cities. It wouldn't be too tough. I don't even know if you need to vary too much from any of these in order to make it work. That's your guys' call.
Cool. So, your feeling is that we should wait until somebody's interested in it, or?
I think you could take it on as a work program. I would, my recommendation would be to adopt an ordinance when you felt like there was enough demand once you got to that point where you felt comfortable to do it. Just so that you don't adopt an ordinance that doesn't end up working for anybody and you have to go back and fix it. Or do a program kind of like this. And again, I don't know where the ADU language is in the municipal code, so that's a caveat. I'm sure it's included as in the accessory use section, but Lacey allows ADUs on any residential zone in the city, irrespective of the lot size. You still have to meet setbacks, So if you can't fit it, you can't fit it,
Just
right?
on
You
the-
can't
just
stick it
on
on
the
your neighbor's
borders.
fence, right? But, and you have to have, you know, the setbacks that are required in your zone, you still have to meet. But I don't think you know, you need, the whole issue with ADUs is if the minimum lot size is 5,000 square feet, in order to build a second unit, right, you would need 10,000 square feet, right, 5 per. So right now, it's, if you have a 5,000 square foot lot, you can add an accessory dwelling unit and not exceed your, it doesn't count against your density. You just have to find a spot to match up with your, you know, with your setbacks. You still have to have water and sewer connections, that stuff's not cheap, you're still gonna have to pay a sewer connection fee, that's not cheap. So a lot of this stuff doesn't go away, and that's why I think you haven't seen a lot of them. But different than what Olympia did, Olympia tried to do this missing middle, you know, comprehensive plan approach where they allowing duplexes and cottage homes and other types of developments in certain zones in the city, and they had a pretty sizable uproar from citizens. Lacey just said, put ADUs everywhere you want as long as they meet standards. So if that wasn't too much of a talk around, I think you could start working on it and figuring out like which zones it could apply to, kind of what standards you want. Is 680 the right size? Is, you know, do you have to have a parking pad? Right, some of those more kind of interesting things to think about. You know, do you fence those separately, or they just drop them in a backyard? Because remember, the idea is that you're going to be renting it out, like a revenue stream. And while we all like the revenue, we may not like having, you know, Johnny and his 2 college buddies living in the, you know, the unit in the back.
On the other side of your fence, right?
Or in your
Right in your
backyard.
backyard.
Yeah, other side of your fence, and you're in the neighbor's.
Fences.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
If they're in your backyard, you did it to yourself. But no, but that is a really, yeah, that's a really neat though kind of concept to dive into.
Okay.
Especially brings a, you know, a lot of times a younger crowd that could really help liveliness of downtown.
So you wanna do that? You wanna direct me to do that?
Yes, let's do that.
Use your little,
That sounds like it would be interesting.
Robert's rules approach,
Do we need to make some kind of a motion to do that, or probably not? Let's just do that. You guys wanna talk about ADUs more?
Yeah.
Start to get it set up, I guess. I like it.
alright, you want it to be a 2020 work program item, that's what I'm hearing.
Yes, why not?
Alright, that gives us some agenda items for the month of April. I'll start bringing back some, I'll figure out how to put something together that makes sense, to start working through. Probably a series of meetings, you know, 2 to 3, I would say. We'll figure something out. Some type of property inventory, looking at where things might fit. I don't know. I'll bat a couple things around.
Okay, sounds good. Do we need more things to talk about for our 2020 work plan? Probably.
Annexation, I think is going to happen. There's probably gonna be an annexation petition later this year.
Is
So
this
today's training session.
Over
will
by
help
Scatter
with that.
Creek?
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I wanna say Nelson, but is that the right road? Is there a Nelson Road over there?
So Scatter Creek, is this heading out this way?
No, out that way.
Oh, okay.
Well, like in the Houston
Maybe.
Street area, sort of.
Oh,
I'll tell you the road here.
so further south on Houston.
I think so. Right along Scatter Creek, I think. A lot of it's
No,
right along.
yeah, it is, it's Nelson Lane, which
Oh.
is Houston, and then you take a right on 8th towards the creek, and then Nelson is like the one that parallels the creek. There's I wanna say it's a 7-acre parcel out there, and I've had conversations, it's in one of your work plans from, January's meeting, I believe. It was listed as a potential future annexation, so that's the same one.
I have another thing that the mayor suggested we might wanna talk about. The city owns the asphalt parking lot behind the Sandstone Cafe. And the business owners are clamoring to have that paved, but the city doesn't have the means to pay for that. I think it's gonna be like $50,000-ish. But the city can do some of the grading and removal and all that, but he had an idea that maybe we could entice development along the street that's behind, I don't remember the name of that street for some reason. Like across from, in between the bar and the newspaper, that street that goes across.
Is that Olympia? Is that
No, it's the next one over. Howard? Yeah, Howard.
Howard?
Has suggested that maybe we could entice a developer to develop maybe some upstairs apartments and downstairs commercial along Howard there, and have them redevelop the parking lot as part of like whatever kind of sweet deal the city would offer on that property. And I don't know what's really feasible with that, but he asked me to bring it up, so I'm bringing it up to see if, what you think and if it's worth talking about.
So to recap, the parking lot behind Sandstone Cafe is owned by the city.
That's correct.
And you're suggesting that the mayor has an idea, or he's curious on whether there might be market interest in developing that.
If the city were to make a deal with, if it were even possible for the city to make some kind of sales deal whereby the contractor would pave like a good bit of the site and make it a parking lot for downtown, and then in exchange develop the strip along Howard Street. He was excited about the prospect of maybe like live-work units or something like that on the first floor, and then apartments up above. Like sort of a trend in Seattle and Olympia to a lesser extent right now. Don't know what the viability of that concept is, or what we can do, but he was suggesting maybe we could talk about it and then pass along some kind of recommendation to the council at some point on maybe what they should do with that lot. And I know from my role in the chamber that the downtown businesses really want that lot to be paved. Because it's really potholes now, obviously, there's some sections of asphalt and concrete that are just thinly covered with gravel in places, and it's just kind of a mess. Is there any, like, what can the city, do you have a concept of what the city can do to entice somebody in that regard, or any legal constraints to doing that, something like that?
Anybody who builds on that lot would have to do frontage improvements regardless of the purchase price. You know, they could buy it for $1, they could buy it for $10 million, they'd still have to do frontage improvements on Howard and Central as it wraps around.
In terms of sidewalk, probably replacement and maybe some street trees potentially, or some kind of landscaping.
Yep. And so if you build on the lot, then you lose it for parking, so that's the part I'm not tracking.
Well, the concept as it was explained to me would be like a long rectangular structure along Howard that would front on Howard,
Okay, got
not
it.
on Central, and then, that's
And then on the
The backside.
backside of
the backside
Howard
would just be
building
parking,
would
you know,
just be
like
parking.
urban kind of parking lot, basically.
And that would probably happen too. But then once, I guess depending on how a potential sale would go, right? Cause you could sell off, you could short plat that off and sell off the portion that fronts on Howard. And then, you know, use the proceeds or however you wanna do it to pave the back half, or sell the whole thing with the condition that X number of parking stalls has to be accommodated for, but then it would be, you know, private property, and, so, I mean, all of those are possibilities.
Yeah.
So it probably almost have to be like short plat, the frontage on Howard, but have it that the city maintains ownership of the parking lot, but the contractor
That makes
Agrees.
sense, yeah.
to pave it,
Yeah,
but the city retains ownership.
Yeah, that,
that would probably make the most sense for going on in the future, I guess.
Now, I know, and you know, we've been to, a number of the chamber meetings, or, you know, breakfast, and yeah, that's something that they seem to be really struggling with, is parking. I was just trying to think of, yeah,
They really wanna paint the spots on the street too in Sussex. It's their other
Right.
thing they keep talking about.
paint where you're supposed to parallel park.
yeah,
Yeah, so people do it in a more sensible way.
so they can maximize the stalls. There's always one that just,
Ruins it for everyone.
I mean, there's, as you all know, quite a few vacant storefronts on Sussex already. So that's always the question is building new versus buying and rehabbing.
Right, well, yeah, and I mean, I realize that in reality. And I brought it up when I was talking to I think from the chamber's point of view, they just wanna see that lot paved. But, you know, I think the mayor was trying to think of some creative ways to get that done, maybe, and get some other stuff done at the same time.
John didn't mention, but if you've noticed, the city is advertising for a public works director. I don't know when that's going to close, maybe next week, the
Yeah,
the
maybe.
18th, something like that.
Tell me.
But Troy's staying on, right? He's just gonna.
Yes.
Yeah, he's gonna be, wants to be a worker instead of the boss now.
A PE is not required for that position, but hopefully whoever gets into that role has ideas about, you know, sources of funding and grant writing and things like that, so that these types of questions can be more directly answered by, you know, people in the field, you know, in their profession.
what do you say about that position, you don't have to have a,
Professional engineer's license,
oh, okay.
yeah, which means like, you know,
But it would be nice.
yeah, I just don't, I looked at it, I don't think the pay's gonna get you a
No.
PE unless it's someone on the tail end of their career just looking for something fun and challenging to do.
Semi-retirement. kind
Yeah.
of, Well,
But if you know anybody,
okay. Well, shall we do our annexation discussion now?
yep,
Nice. You gonna go home? Should I adjourn the meeting, or should I not?
Yeah, whenever you're, well, whenever
Whenever
you're
we're
done, and then just adjourn it, and then we'll just clean up.
Can do that. Oh, in the utility bill box? Okay.
So you know, Gerald, Gerald's down. So, I say all the time, we're walking down here, he's around the corner, he's talking to me, he's always trying to sell me something, you know? He's like, hey.
I have some keys, but they're from before the lock change.
Oh, is it? Okay.
I goes, I got 18,
So I'll tell him.
1892 was the year that house was built.
I'll just put those in the box.
How much for the 1892? The live box.
Oh,
Yeah, it's like,
Did he scrap those rocks, I guess?
that's what I gotta figure out.
I don't know what to do.
Yeah, I guess, I go through something like that.
That's pretty cool.
There's still a key ring, right? When I get rid of
Oh, yeah. Yeah, bring him in.
There.
Thanks.
It's drafty,
And the school bond passed since we last met, I believe.
Yes.
So that's really good news.
That's always a question, though.
I'm going to try to finagle my way onto the facilities planning committee for the school district. Because I wanna see what types of expansions and remodels they're planning on doing. might put, you know, I don't know what enrollment looks like, does anybody else know what enrollment looks like? Yeah,
Like
and I know they have a modular that we permitted on the elementary school site.
And there was some buzz going on at the high school, hoping to, build a new high school before too long.
But the bond was not was it a capital or just M and O, right?
It was just to replace the one that was
The maintenance and operations
sunsetting.
levy, yeah.
Sort of build a new school, that's a total different
That's a
bond.
capital bond,
Okay.
yeah, but I think that's what the facilities committee's gonna look like, usually, I've served on those before, they look at enrollment, growth projections, like your type of stuff with, you know, comp plan and housing, and then they try to project how many students they need to accommodate, and then divide that by square footage for, you know, best, practices, and multiply it out, and then look at how big of a school they have and how much room they need, and then start looking for sites. That's always a challenge.
Yeah, that is one thing, they, very rarely, it seems like they tear down, well, either they'll build a new school on the same site but in a different location, but I guess they just, feasibly, they can't really just tear down the school
Can't
to
just be
rebuild the same
without
place.
one.
Right,
But,
put the kids in the park.
so that,
Glory house.
that might, I mean, you know, West Tenino has got ground, right, it's not that far out of town, it's dry, we can avoid the gophers.
Who owns the high school property? Is it the,
School district.
it is the school district? So if they built, okay, that's why if they built a school, like, let's say out there, they'd convert that into, they usually don't tear them down and like rezone them, they just hang on to them.
Right, right,
Oh, yeah, there you go.
they repurpose them for the other school so that the stagger's all right.
Right.
But that relates to annexation, I think I can segue that recently. It's a thicker packet than normal, so. I won't read through. Does anyone know anything about annexation? It's okay to say yes or no.
The bare bones, just
Yeah, bare bones.
like a city expanding its, city limits to incorporate an area.
Yep.
Is it only done when somebody wants to be annexed?
No.
Could-
Sometimes the city
could
can
just
decide.
that
Yeah,
they
we'll
wanna
talk
do-
about that. Did anyone bring their zoning map with them? And how was the sustainability presentation? Was that any good last month?
Oh, from the
I
two
liked it,
gals?
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, yeah.
Okay, so, annexation is how we get things from the urban growth area into the city limits. That's the short GMA answer, alright? So your city limits is this nice, colored, basically, this thing right here.
So is this that plot that gentleman's eventually thinking?
Yeah.
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 So your UGA is this area right here, like there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 parcels there, that's
Should
UGA.
get rid of that.
There's about 6 parcels here, that's UGA, that's the potential annexation site off of Nelson Lane. It's about 7.8 acres. There's, these 2 parcels of potential annexation, next to Hidden Meadow.
Well, those are along my Acres Road.
Yep. Yep, I think that's the, one of these is like the lieutenant, there's a sheriff's.
Yeah, Black Heart, that's always our blue
Yeah.
light.
Yep, and that's pretty much it as far as UGA, this, and this.
So the way that it works, so we have our city limits, and then we actually, through UGA, say the next place that we would logically annex would be these. So then does that mean we're kind of tied to these places only? We would have to outline something in a UGA before we could ever annex? Okay.
Correct.
That's just kind of letting people know eventually this will probably happen. Okay.
Right, yeah, so the question is why annex, right? And annexation is a mechanism to bring things that are getting more dense and requiring more services into a more compact form in the city, you know, or allowing around the city to expand into that area to serve it. So what GMA, if you remember from our earlier sessions, was a reaction to or response to was this sprawl, right? Where all this low-lying 5-acre, 4-acre parcels happening and chewing up all the land on the outside, a lot of it agricultural land or resource land, and then you have all this inefficient use of land. You know, they don't make land too much anymore unless you're in Dubai or somewhere like that. Mostly around here, it's just the land you've got is the land you've got. So we're trying to use it more efficiently, and so the state said we're going to start drawing lines and colors on maps that say like, you can't build an apartment complex way out there because inevitably, if you put an apartment complex out there, they're gonna have more fire calls, more police calls, they're gonna eventually need a sewer because their septic's gonna fail because they're just, you know, taxing it too much. They're gonna want a school or a bus route, right? And so all of these urban level of services out there in hinterland, and now you've got the buses going way over here, fire calls going way over here, and everybody else's response time goes down. So we're trying to do a little bit more compact form. So that's kind of what the urban growth area is. So that number one is rapid development and population growth occurring just outside city boundaries, where property is cheaper. I mean, that's the problem with GMA and just zoning in general is the farther you are away from a core, usually the cheaper your land is unless you're on waterfront, right? And so generally speaking, it's cheaper to buy a county lot, or you get more for your money than you would for getting a city lot. But that's because a lot of other things are baked into that cost, right? Grocery stores across the street, you know, I can walk my kid to school, I'm on a bus route, and none of that stuff exists out wherever.
Right, it's a big parks next door.
Right. So a lot of that's just one reason why it's in there. And so what happens is things start, you know, going badly. Septic systems fail. You know, you need police and fire service. Putting a sewer line 2 miles out along Dakota Highway is going to be expensive, right? And at some point you can't get septic system. You know about septic systems, right? They're basically on-site little sewer plants, right? You flush your toilet, it goes into a system where it filters out the solids and the liquids go, and eventually the liquids go either into a holding tank and infiltrate into the soils, or into a storage tank or sand, or you know, there's a couple of different methods. But you need a certain amount of land for your drain field, right? And then now the county says you need a reserve drain field, and you need an emergency reserve drain field. That's how it's working right now.
Really?
It's like three drain fields. The one you use, the one you're gonna overflow into, and if everything goes really badly, a third one. Right? So you need a lot of land for something like that. For every bedroom you have, you need a new vault, or you need a new, you know, lid. And so you can't be, you're gonna need 5 acres of land just to accommodate enough room for all your drain fields, and so that's what the chew up occurs. If you're hooked up to sewer, you can be on a 3,000 square foot lot, no problem, right? So your densities just, you know, go through the roof, and you're allowed more things. So as more people move in, if we try to accommodate them with this 5 acre stuff on the edges, it's gonna be silly, you know, silly about how that happens. And that's what, like, a lot of Texas looks like that, and I think all the places that look just like, why'd they do that? And it's like, well, it's because it was cheap at the time.
So just like a little development here, and then a little, that's what you're talking about, just kind of that urban sprawl.
Yeah, where like, see all these, how these are all chunked up,
Or,
right? That's, I mean, look at you could fit like 30 city lots in there, right? And that's one house, right? And my one sewer. And that works at that level because it's only me and my 3 bedrooms, and you know, the septic system works fine. But when everybody's doing it, and you're doing it all the way across the system, at some point my well runs dry.
Sure.
Or, you know, the water quality starts getting, you know, impacted. Or now we're all loading onto this little county road, Blumauer Road, and it's all backed up because, you know, all of us are commuting somewhere. We're not farming the land, so we're driving somewhere. And so all this development that was back 15, 20 years ago that was pretty straightforward is now challenging. And they're all loading up on the same road, and this is all queuing up because this is a county road too, and no one ever expected there to be this much traffic. So that's some of the reasons why they annex. Just to make sure there's more orderly provision of public services. So most of the time, cities, when they're looking at annexing, do this kind of annexation study. I'm not gonna read all of that, you can kind of look at it, it's what you'd expect. You know, how are we gonna provide services, where are we growing, you know, what type of revenue might we be talking about? What, you know, are we annexing people who, are we contemplating annexing people who are gonna fight us and they don't wanna be annexed, or it's a, you know, it's a big equestrian facility and we don't allow horses in our city, so now what do? If we annex them and they're vested, we gotta write a new section of our code to allow for, you know, equestrian uses. Or we gotta try to sunset them, which is a battle usually, cause usually there's this, did we talk about vesting? We talked about vesting a little bit. Vesting is like another way of saying grandfathering.
Okay.
That's a big oversimplification, but generally speaking, if you legally establish something at some point back in the day, you're usually allowed to maintain that use, right? So my grandpappy put this, you know, equestrian barn here, we've been riding horses for hundreds of years, you know, and now you're telling me I can't ride horses no more, right? And I didn't change anything. There's usually an accommodation for stuff like that.
And usually that'll be, that way as long as you continue to use the property for that specific purpose, but at any point in time, if you stop, then it rolls over too.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
So like the mobile home park over there in Tenino Estates, that's on septic still, right? Do you know?
I don't know.
I remember when they installed the sewer, that was a big deal because nobody had thought about the fact that there was a law that said that they were required to go on the sewer or something.
Right, there is a law that says unless your septic system, unless there's a public health hazard or pending hazard, you can't force someone to connect to sewer, unless you pay for their connection. I think that's the biggest part, so there's like a $3,500 fee a lot of times to connect, or there's actual engineering cost because, you know, my system's over here and your sewer's over there and they're 150 feet apart, and I ain't paying that 150 feet worth of engineering and sewer to connect. And so when I worked up in Lakewood, we sewered all of Tillicum, which is the little funny little community outside the base, and it was all set up with loans and grants for those, because there's a lot of low-income people in there, so the city came in and just said, we'll take care of it, right? But once you're on, now you got your $200 set, you know, sewer charges every 2 months or whatever. Most of those units were, in a lot of these cases, it's not owner-occupied, it's a landlord situation, so. And sometimes cities will be, give like certain time frames. Okay, you guys have 2 years to connect, or 3 years to connect, and then they'll come in and say, you know, you gotta do it. If you connect right now, we'll pay for half of it, but if you wait for 2 years, you have to pay for all of it. Because what happens is the sewer system won't work correctly unless there's enough connections, right? And so there's these, you know, technical issues that you can't have a dry sewer out there and just you flush your toilet and expect it to work.
To go 3 miles,
It'll
right?
sit there and it'll corrode the pipe, so you
Totally.
need enough flow through there, so if we all do that, then it's fine. So that's what, you know, systems like this are a lot of money, and that's why you need to make sure you run some numbers to pencil and say, okay, this is $1 million line, but we're gonna get 200 home connections. Eventually that'll pay for itself because of this, of the utility fees that they're paying every 2 months, or whatever.
How long ago was ours?
Oh, they did it there? Yeah, 07.
Oh, this one up here, that's when we got this new big plant?
Uh-huh.
07.
Longer ago.
Yeah, that is longer than I had thought too.
So that's what I talk about there. Number one, cost of extending services being provided by the city. If it exceeds the city's financial capability, you know, when is it gonna be financially possible? Because remember, the UGA is supposed to be accommodating 20 years worth of growth, and so magically at the end of a 20-year time frame, you're supposed to say, all right, time to annex, you're all built, you're ready to build, or you're all built out, or whatever it is. Or we need your land to be in the city now so we can grow into it. Because when it's in the UGA, it's still under county zoning, right? So it still may say, in a lot of places, places, not every place, but it still may say like 5-acre lots. And then when you've got sewer right outside that UGA now, it's said, okay, let's pull it into the city, and now we're gonna change the zoning to 12 units per lot, or acre. So now, because you've got all those capacity, you've got that public
Does
services.
that put landowners kind of in a bit of a bind
Oh,
as to whether or not they should?
I was gonna ask there. Cause like if you have 10 acres
Yeah.
in your county, I imagine your property tax is probably different than 10-acre city. But the minute you're annexed in, you're now 10-acre city, regardless of if you're grandfathered in with your barn or not.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so you'll charge it, you'll get charged the city property tax issues on, on that, whatever the delta is between the two. But, now you've got people knocking on your door saying, I noticed you got 10 acres when you got a barn and
Sure.
a house on it, and I
And
could
it's
turn
zoned
that in,
for-
and it's zoned for 4 units an acre, and I could put 40 houses on that, right? And that's worth $4 million, would you like me to write you a check?
And then
That's
hopefully-
how that happens.
Yeah, hopefully that person goes, Florida's sounding pretty good.
Yeah.
So that's,
Minnesota.
that's how that happened. I mean, that's how Hidden Meadows happened. I don't know if I shouldn't say that. I would assume that's how Hidden Meadows happened, where someone was sitting on a, couple, 5, 6, 7, 8 acre lots. Someone said, hey, I think I can do something. It's adjacent to this stuff, and that's how it came about.
So here's a question, I know that in previous, I remember hearing that at times it had been talked about annexing, the minor acres, but they're really against that. So, the GMA area can change, like at one point in time, was that in our GMA area?
I don't know.
Oh,
Not since I've lived here.
okay,
They've always been no annexation.
right.
Very adamant about it.
So to even put someone in the GMA area, they have to agree,
The UGA area.
or I'm sorry, UGA area.
So UGAs can be decided on by the Planning Commission and the council.
Okay.
It's part of the planning process of the comprehensive plan amendment or update.
There's no requirement to do public involvement or anything, because
There's-
there's no actual
there's-
action taken.
Well, there's a requirement when you do the comp plan update or amendment to have a public hearing prior to adoption, but they don't need their permission to turn them into UGA. Just like you don't need someone's permission to zone them R4 or commercial or anything. It's not the greatest thing to do, but you don't need permission. There are a lot of the annexation things do need permission. There are ways around that, but the methods of annexation, one of them is permission, sort of permission based.
I've always thought that it makes a lot of sense to annex. I don't know why they're so against it. I feel like some people could make a lot of money, like splitting up lots, just like we were talking about down that direction. And now with the sewer right there and the water right out in front, like, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense except for, to not do it, except for that they don't want it, but.
Okay, so here's a question for you, cause, when I was up in Kitsap, working at the fire department up there, I remember there was a part, we were county, and there was a part where there was an island that was the county. So it was really weird, like to respond to calls, we would literally drive through like 5 blocks of the city to this little island to service them. So if one person says, I don't wanna be annexed, do they become a little island?
No, I don't.
I mean, this was a
That's
whole
probably
community,
an old situation. There's a whole section in here on, island annexations. Not like the Hawaiian Islands, but like the type of islands you're talking about, which is surrounded by, I think it's 70% of the boundary. If it's surrounded by city, the city can just annex it. They don't
Gotcha.
need permission. But sometimes cities don't wanna annex things because that means now we have to respond to calls there. We have to provide those people with water, or that's
sewer.
not enough revenue to offset all the requests for services. So
There are a few of those in Thurston County, right? Like-
Yep, yeah, we'll look at some of them here in a little bit. Lakewood had an area that was just like that. The whole thing was built out already. It was already, 8,000 square foot lots. They had homes on them. They had county roads. And so they're like, annex us, and the city ran the numbers a couple different times, and it just never penciled. The amount of money that you would get, from tax revenues would not get anywhere near the amount of money you would spend in doing calls, responding to police calls for service. And you can track that, because they're calling the sheriff and saying, look, someone's out stumbling down the street, and the sheriff would come from wherever, Spanaway, all the way across Lakewood.
Sure.
And to Arrowhead Acres or Glen or whatever it was, to respond to something, 15 minutes later, and so they were like, we wanna be in the city with a 3-minute response time. It just would never pencil, it never works, and that's partly because of the way the state's tax system is set up on land, and the only way cities really make money is sales tax.
Right.
You can make money on lodging tax, you can make some money on business and occupation tax, and you make some money on property tax, but if you've ever seen a property tax pie and where all the money goes, the city gets a little sliver. Look at your tax assessment next time if you have a house. Look at where all your property tax goes. It's school,
Yep.
and it's fire, and it's water, and it's other special purpose districts. The city gets a little slice.
And that's why our biggest thing is trying to get people to come here, make it a desirable area, so that hopefully they spend money here, right? And that's where our big funding source comes from, then, is that sales tax.
Now, it's all related. You need nice places for people to live so that they
Totally.
feel good about, shopping in downtown, right?
And you fill up the empty storefronts because there's enough people here to keep them in business,
Right.
basically.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a lot of it's related, but many times annexing all complete residential areas just doesn't pencil.
I see.
So that's some of the things we talk about in here. Advise people in the annexation area who must approve the annexation, when they can expect to receive the new improved services. So again, we're just talking about the annexation study. So, we approach a property owner and say, look, the city's got a plan for this, we think we're gonna annex you in about 3 years. Here's what the process looks like, you should be thinking about it, here's what we found as far as the costs that would be associated, your current tax rate, your future tax rate, your current response time, your future response time, and try to make the case. Just because it's important to people, and that's kind of sort of the right thing to do if you're bringing them in. Consequences of annexation on page 2, just I talked about a few of these things. A lot of times, special districts, their boundaries follow city boundaries. So when you move the city boundaries, you now are all of a sudden moving that special district. Sometimes school districts are like that. Water districts frequently are tied to city boundaries. So their water franchise agreement says, we will serve water for the entire city of Tenino, period. Right? Well, if you move the boundaries of cities now you gotta serve that, right? And then what happens, and I don't think that's the case here, I don't really have a good handle on the water system here, but a lot of times there's people who are already serving rural area with, water through the PUD or whatever.
Or like a community water company or something.
Right, so they may have a community water system in the Smith Farms subdivision, they may have a community Class A water system. Well, then they don't, they're not gonna need that, and are you gonna force them to connect if their water system's perfectly fine? That would be stupid because of the way water rights works, you don't wanna do that, but those are the types of considerations that have to be made. So it's not just a quick thing. Revenue, we talked a little bit about, there's a whole series of different things. State revenue share works on population, they give more money to Seattle than they give to Washington. That's just how it works. Maybe not on a per capita basis, but certainly on a gross basis. Population numbers drive funding formulas. So here we get into, in the middle of page 2, the different methods for annexation. There's 3 main ones. Election method by 20% petition, election method by resolution, and the 75% petition method. The first 2 are not as common, mostly because in the election method, it's really up to those people and that live in the area that's about to be annexed, and you can have multiple elections and it, you know, it fails over and over and over and over and over. Because you're just leaving it up to the people who live there. Resolution puts a lot of pressure on a city council or a, you know, deciding body, and they don't often like to be in that role. Especially not knowing necessarily how the property owners in that annexed area, in the UGA area that's gonna be annexed want to go. So both of those first two aren't as common. There's different annexation methods depending on what type of city you are. There's first class, second class, third class, and fourth class cities. And there's also code cities, like Seattle's a code city. They basically write their own municipal code that has a whole series of different approaches than state law has for most cities. So they have a charter or a constitution, so some of the cities are different. But our process is the 75% method. That's the one that's outlined most clearly in Tenino's code, which is by petition of the owners of at least 75% of the property value in an area computed according to the assessed valuation of the property in a proposed annexation area. So that's a wordy way of saying you look at all the parcels in the area that you're hoping to annex, and you add that up, and it's a big number, right? And then you allocate proportional share to each of those parcels. So let's say, for sake of argument, that the annexed area is $1 million, and you have a $200,000 parcel, you have a $500,000 parcel, you have a $300,000 parcel. You know, you get like 2 votes, you get 5 votes, and you get 3 votes, right? And if I get 75%, you're in, right? So if there's a single property owner, like the Barnett property, then it's easy to get to the 75% petition method.
Especially if they're on board, then it's like.
Right, but if they're not on board, then you've gotta do this resolution method or one of the other ones. And that's not the best example, cause that had other issues, but that's an easy example. So this 75% petition method, you need to at least get signatures on the front end of 10% of the residents of the area proposed to be annexed, either by actually the residents or 10% of the valuation of the annexation. So back to this other example, the math isn't really gonna work anymore, but obviously if the 50% property owner wants to do it, he can use this method to do it, right? Or at least to initiate the annexation, right? Because there's 2 parts. There's the petition, like, hello, we'd like to be annexed, and then the council says, okay, you've shown enough interest, you've hit this 75% threshold to initiate it. Now we're gonna ask you to vote, and so you each get your 3 votes, your 5 votes, your 2 votes, and we have to hit 75 in order for you to come in, right? So there's 2 processes.
You just need 10% to initiate.
Correct.
Yeah.
So anybody who has, and so in that scenario, any of the 3 of you could initiate the annexation process, right? And then it's basically up to one of you to convince one of the other of you to make it work. Although you convincing him to do it would still not get there. They have to have you.
Yep.
You're the linchpin.
Money bags.
And I didn't know this, but I didn't know about this board of directors of a school district. I'll have to look into that. I'm not aware that, I just didn't know that school board directors can also initiate a petition, but that would make sense. So far so good. I mean, that's, the pages 4 through 7 is Tenino's process. If you wanna geek out later, you can read it. I shorthanded it in the annexation in Tenino at the top of page 4, the process, and this is the process that I outlined for the Nelson Lane property owner who asked me about it. Up to 5 months on the process, so you can see it there, 1 through 7. His is easier because he's the only property owner, so that's easy to initiate that petition. And then at the bottom of page 2, you can see that annexation of unincorporated islands, so if you have less than 100 acres and 80% of the boundaries are contiguous, the city can initiate annexation proceedings by resolution, you can just go for it, right? But there's, the boundary review board at Thurston County is like this appointed body of staff and elected officials, I think it's actually all elected officials, but it's like Katrina Van Every, who used to be the planner here, she's the chair, or she's the staff assistant for that, and they basically process annexation permits or petitions through them, and it provides an intermediary between a city who really wants to do it and a property owner who really doesn't wanna do it, because in that case, if the property owner doesn't want it, the city doesn't want it, there's no one in between, they're just gonna smash into each other, so this group is up top and helping to run that process. So on the next page is a fun little example. Top annexation, easy. Bottom annexation, hard. And that's oversimplification, but you know, the shape of the one up top and the property owners are, it's easier to annex it when it kind of makes sense on a map, and when, I mean, this is a huge annexation, so it's not easy, but it looks better, right? The 10 square miles of the West Plains by Spokane Airport outside Airway Heights is proposed to be annexed into the city of Spokane. And they're gonna give a little bit of that to Airway Heights when they run that process, so there's not an island, right? Because if they annexed it and left this little island here, you'd be looking at more than 70% of the property would be, so that whole piece right there would all be adjacent to city boundaries. It's way more than 70%. So they're just gonna take care of it all and give it all over to Airway Heights as part of the annexation process. Lacey's, on the other hand, that's what that map is a cluster. And there's some reasons for that. But we did an annexation study for Lacey about 3 years ago, because they wanted to look at the potential for annexing the Tanglewild neighborhood, and also stuff along Martin Way from like the cinemas all the way to like the Costco area. Well, not quite that far, like Galaxy Drive is about where it stops. All that's county right now, all the way back to the freeway. So when you drive there and you kind of come up the hill by Carpenter, and you drive past the pot shops, and you drive past Great Floors, and you drive past Sonic. And
That's
you
all
drive,
county?
It's all county. And so what's happening is the county's developing that stuff, and the city says, wait a second, that's not our standard, right? You're allowing them to do rolled curbs, we have vertical curbs. Or you're allowing them to do infiltration, we don't do that, right? I don't know all the details, but it's that type of, you know, one agency's standards and another agency's standards. And what do we know about all the type of activity that's going on along Martin Way?
Well, yeah, we have a good friend who's a sheriff, deputy over there in
Right.
Tanglewild area. That's
Right? What do we know about the economic activity that's going on Martin Way?
yeah. Well, I would say that it's, from what we've seen here recently, it's doing really, really well.
Yeah, but
I mean,
all that revenue is going to the county, right?
Okay.
Get it? So Great Floors, Winco,
Totally.
all that revenue is going to the county.
Sonic. So in that case, when they're looking at that, really, the carrot is not Tanglewild. The carrot is Martin, and they're willing to take on Tanglewild to have Martin. Okay.
Cause you gotta get there, because you can't, the boundary review board, when they look at this thing and they see this funny little drawing to suck in this commercial piece and leaving all the residential stranded, they're gonna say, no, you can't do that.
And that's kind of almost like what we require site improvements, right? Like if you want to develop this and make some money, that's fine, put in a sidewalk for the greater good. So they're also watching just to make sure that,
Well, what's gonna happen is if cities could annex whatever they want, and they'd always leave the crap to the counties.
Totally,
Right.
totally,
Makes sense.
And the counties can't annex, they don't have that right. And they're always in negative mode, they're only going one direction. It's rare, that's not always true. Cities can un-UGA, right, you can take a portion of your property out of UGA, that happened in Island County, it happens where they said, we thought growth was gonna go over here, turns out that's not gonna happen, we're gonna take that UGA and move it over to this spot, cause that's where most of the economic activity is occurring. Has happened, but mostly counties are in the one-way ticket down to, bankruptcy. There's just because the state has already said urban growth goes in urban areas. Big retail, commercial structures go in a place where there's urban services. And if the state tax system is set up where the big revenue generator is retail sales, and you're saying only that can go in cities, then what are counties supposed to live off?
So how did the county ever get that through in the first place? Like, they're not supposed to be developing like at that scale anyway, right? Like right next to a city, it just seems kind of
Right, because it's in the UGA for Lacey.
inevitably.
So like
I
that-
mean, there's like, it will be in Lacey at some point. There's no
Yes.
question about
No
that,
question.
right?
And the county knows that, but they'll
yeah.
hold on to it as long as they can and get whatever money they can, as long as they can.
It's bizarre. They're not supposed to be developing like that, right? That's not really their purview, I guess. I mean, they're doing the Grand Mound and Rochester thing, somewhat similar. It makes sense that that would be developed since it's on the 5, but they're not really supposed to be doing that, right? I mean, it's,
Well-
it's allowed, but.
So do you remember when we talked about Lammert's,
Yeah.
local areas of more intense rural development?
Oh, yeah.
And that's what Martin, that was the justification for Martin, right?
Mhm.
But until they built all that stuff, there wasn't that much stuff up there. Like,
Well, so the Lammert in Grand Mound, Rochester, which I think is technically a Lammert, but they've given it other types of community designations. Is a different example than on Martin Way, because the Martin Way stuff's in a city's UGA. So it's expected to develop at an urban level of service, and so it's just a matter of when the city chooses to annex. Until the city chooses to annex, it's in the UGA, and it can be developed in urban densities with the anticipation of it being annexed.
So I
oh, go ahead.
was just gonna say, I can see how that could be a problem, so it's almost like, who can get to it first, right? If the county can allow it to be developed first, they get some money on it before it's turned over, but then I can see how your cohesion goes out the door, right? Cause the county's just going, oh, you want us, yeah, put it there, do that, and they're not really thinking long-term with
Probably
what.
in a hurry too.
Oh, totally, totally. They're like, one way in, one way out, that won't be a traffic problem, do it. Yeah, okay.
Well, so, up on Martin Way then, are all those businesses, they're all on Lacey utilities or no? Like sewer and water?
I don't. So does Lacey operate their own sewer?
Well, it's.
Or
I guess
they, or
it's-
lot,
It's lot,
is it
right?
the Lacey Olympia Tumwater?
Right,
Yeah.
right, so I think
But they
it's
have-
actually LOTT, right? Lacey, Olympia, Tumwater, Thurston.
Oh,
is that the
Is
last, is that what the last?
there are two T's, yeah.
I
didn't
think
know
it's
that.
all the same, so
Yeah.
none of the cities are
nobody's
really
out
getting money out of the sewer.
necessarily.
Yeah, and I know there's sewer down the middle of Martin, but a lot of those neighborhoods are not sewered. You know, and so so we talked about reasons for annexing. One of the reasons that Lacey initiated the annexation study was they suspect that there's water quality issues around the lakes because of septic systems that are not working correctly.
Sure.
Failing septic systems. And most of the time, people don't know their septic system is failing unless your toilet blows up, right? So it could be you could have a hole in the ground, and if you flush the toilet and it goes away and you never see it, you're never gonna ask anybody about it.
Right.
And if the lake or the river a mile away happens to get bloomed with algae because of whatever, that's not my fault, right? And so it's really hard to prove that septic systems are failing on a system-wide basis, but most of those septic systems were built in the 60s. and 70s. And so just by a function of their age, there's the assumption that they're not working very well and they haven't been wholesale updated, right? And so
The standards back then were
what
pretty.
happens is,
Right.
what happens is, when you go in and you annex, now, you can't get a new septic permit when your septic system fails, or it's time to replace your drain field or whatever. It's time to connect a sewer, and now that's a financial hardship because the line's 50 feet away, you're gonna charge me $3,500 just for the connection. It's gonna cost another $7,000 just to engineer the thing to get it connected to my house, and I don't have $10,500. So what are you gonna do, right? And so now you file a hardship, and you either get a waiver, or someone's gotta come in with a low interest loan, or lien my property for the amount. It's not a pretty, yeah, it's messy. That's a great way to put it.
Well, I mean, too, like the Tanglewald area, I mean, I know it has a very high rental population, and so, I mean, yeah, there's so many things involved with, wow.
Yeah, so if you look at this thing, so if you see those two big green polygons kinda in the middle, one's kinda looks like it's right below the big, red swath, that's the big boxes of Costco and Walmart and other things like that. So if you look, it looks like a polygon with an angle on the bottom, you see that one? And there's a green one right across, like kitty corner from that, that's the rack. The green one kitty corner to that is the rack, and the one on the other side of the street is, the school. It's like, the squally, I don't